Ladies and germs, what's happening? After a long day of cutting down dead oak trees with my bare hands, my hands hurt, doing a little work in the studio. So, for the first time, got this little rack set up. Here's my Mackie mixer. Here's my MIDI Sport Uno USB MIDI interface. Here's my laptop. It's a MacBook with an M-Audio Transit audio card. It's USB, which is going into channel number 9 and 10 on my mixer here. These are crappy cables, but it's all I got at the moment because the output of this Transit is a mini eighth of an inch stereo jack. So I've got that going to 2 RCAs, and then I've got 1/4 inch plugs on that. It's a convenience for now. So I'm recording my bass, which is my Fender bass. It's got some new EMG pickups in there. I don't know if you can see on the thing, but anyway, in a badass bridge. And down here in my rack, I got a PV Deca digital power amp. I got a LXP5 multi-effects processor that I just got from eBay yesterday, and I got a reverb turned on to the Rhodes, and I'm using a U220 Roland module up here on the top for my drum sound. And this is the first time since I've been home from the ship in 4 months that I've put together any kind of music system to produce some music. And my idea was, after basically restoring this 54 key Rhodes and also the 73 key Rhodes, which do work now. A little bit more work to do on each one of those, but for the most part they're pretty playable. Incidentally, whenever I was restoring this 54 key, I'm going to show you this. Normally this weird, odd 54 key small piano came with 2 sliders. A volume slider and a bass boost that was just mud. So it was never very functional, and most people didn't use this Rhodes 54 because it was too muddy, and these sliders were different than the norm for every other Rhodes. So after piddling around with wanting to restore it, and I thought the sliders were bad, so I actually ordered a new set of replacement sliders. I had a premonition that if you're going to make the music, the instrument playable, then you have to disregard certain things, and it has to be practical. So the only solution was to dump the sliders. And what I did was I installed me a custom pot right here. So now I have a regular volume pot, just like your volume pot on the 73. All these knobs are different because this is a Rhodes preamp. But this is the exact Rhodes 10K audio taper pot. It came off of a regular Rhodes that also came with the tone control and the cap that was still wired together. So I basically just desoldered all that stuff, and I mounted this Rhodes pot here, and I had to figure out how to wire it on the inside, and so now I got a very solid usable Rhodes here with a normal volume switch like every other Rhodes, and all my pitches work. So anyway, that the 54 basically had I put on balance rail felts to get the keys back up and springy again. It didn't need, neither one of them needed pedestal felts, but I did put balance rail felts in, and I voiced them, and I tuned both, which was a pain. Tuning is the hardest thing, man. That is a pain. It takes a lot of time. But anyway, they're both pretty much restored. So anyway, the whole point of this was, okay, what am I going to do? Do I have a project in mind? And you need to have some kind of plan. So the plan was, with this little throw together studio, which the funny thing about this is I already have 2 or 3 other racks that are already put together. I have 3 total of these Mackie mixers. Both of my other 2 are rack mounted inside a larger rack than this, mounted vertically. And each one of those mixers, the Mackies, are basically, one of them is used solely for my EMU percussion module. So my drum set, on my recordings, my CD projects, the drums need to be EQ'd and reverbed separately for each instrument. So you need a dedicated Mackie mixer like this just for your drum modules. So one of those modules, my EMU percussion uses a Mackie mixer like this, dedicated for it. I think I have a few other things plugged into that Mackie, including a Korg Wave Station AD rack-mounted module. I got a nano bass module, and I have something else in there too, using that mixer. The very first Mackie mixer that I had like this was the very first rack that I put together, and it was a long time ago, man. I had 2 Yamaha RX-17 drum machines, and I didn't have a way. They only had stereo outputs, so you couldn't separate the drums to do the EQ and effects that you need on a regular drum kit. So the only solution to that was to use 2 RX-17 drum machines, and one was your dry kit and the other one was the wet kit. So the stereo outs of one went to a channel on the mixer that had reverb, and the other one went to a channel that was dry, so that you could get your kick drum dry with only stereo outputs, but then you could have reverb on your snare and on your cymbals and whatnot. So that was my first solution for trying to mix a sampled drum kit, was to use 2 drum machines and a MIDI merge to be able to trigger both of them at the same time. And I had those mounted on a shelf in the back of the rack with the MIDI merge device. And the drum, so that was producing my drum sounds, Yamaha RX-17s, and it was a very good, for a not very expensive drum machine back in the day, very good solid sounds with a good Latin percussion, congas and timbales. And I had a Yamaha TX1P sampled piano module, which I use for my piano sound. It had an upgrade card in it because it was a little noisy, but a very good felt kind of piano sound. And another U220 module, which is, I got 2 of those, which is right here, and that has got the best sampled upright bass, in my opinion, of any of the modules. So I'm not using acoustic bass here because I've got my regular Fender bass. So the whole idea tonight was to try, for the first time, open up Digital Performer on my MacBook, which I haven't used for digital audio in a long time. I use my computer on the ship for entertainment. I do use iTunes, and I have all of my albums and all my music categorized, so I use iTunes extensively. I use iPhoto extensively. I use iMovie a little bit. But I've got 3 professional music production programs on my MacBook that I just have never been able to use because I've been working on a ship doing another job playing the piano. So I have Digital Performer, so I can record digital audio and do MIDI sequencing. That's a very professional program, right? People use Logic, they use other things, but Digital Performer at one time was the standard of the industry. I have Mark of the Unicorn Unison, which is a editor librarian so that you can store your synthesizer sounds on the computer. And I'm a little out of date because Mac OS X basically won't read any of the previous files, so all of my synthesizer sounds that I've stored over the years, including thousands of original DX7 patches that I don't want to lose, they're on my old Power Mac upstairs that uses NuBus. I'm going to keep, it still works and my programs are on there, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I haven't lost them. But I need to get modern and download some keyboard sounds into this Unison on Mac OS X. So I haven't used Unison. I've carried it around on the computer for years and years. And I also have Finale. What version of it is I have, I'm not sure, but it's updated on this computer. But the laptop is so small, I just can't get any thrill out of trying to do music notation. But the cool thing is that with the MacBook, it will run Digital Performer. So with one little crappy $100 audio card, right, which is this Transit, it's USB 1/8 of an inch stereo in and out, you can record digital audio into Digital Performer on the Mac without an external hard drive. So that was what I did tonight. Was I laid down a bass track here with my Fender bass first, without any metronome or anything, and then I played along with it on this Rhodes that I restored, just a little funky F blues. And then after I did that and I improvised a little bit, I said, man, I got to get some drums happening again, because I've got these other systems where I've produced music professionally. So I got inspired and I had to go. I haven't had the U220 or the P330 module. This is another really good module too that's kind of a sleeper. It's a smaller version of Roland's MKS20. And it has a beautiful Rhodes. I think it's the best Rhodes synthesizer sound that's ever been made, but it's in a little one space module, and normally I use it. But here again, the point was to try to now, after using modules and such for so many years, was to go back and use these vintage instruments. So I want to play my Fender bass, and I want to play the 73 key Rhodes, but it just became annoyingly apparent that I needed drums. So I can play bass and record that into Digital Performer, and it's playing my bass track back for me so that I can improvise on the Rhodes and play a little tune. But when you're playing funk or something, you got to have some drums. So I went and I plugged in my U220, and I found in a stereo cable so that I could plug it into the mixer. And then I got my MIDI Sport Uno MIDI interface, so it's USB out of the computer. And it just has basically one MIDI out and one MIDI in. It's very basic. My professional system back in the day, which was a Power Mac, I had a Mo2 Micro Express, which was a very good, expensive MIDI interface that cost a lot of money. And I used the audio interface was a Sound Designer 2-card NuBus that was inside the computer, so that's how I would get sound in. I think it had 4 individual RCA jacks for 4 tracks of audio. Yeah, that's what it had. So anyway, I'm using this little $100 just to see if I could get something happening, and sure enough, I got the bass track recorded on the computer. And then after getting the U220 hooked up, I had lots of Digital Performer files that had triggered songs on the U220, but when I plugged it in, it wasn't receiving any MIDI information. So I basically said, well, I got Mac OS X and I haven't used the MIDI Sport Uno in a long time. I better download the current driver. So because I've got wireless internet out here, that was pretty easy, just to go do a little search and get the new Uno driver for Mac OS X 6.8. I can't remember what I've got, but I got the most current version of it and I loaded it in, so that upgraded the driver. But it turns out the reason why the U220 wasn't receiving any information is because I had the MIDI cord from the interface plugged into the P330 instead of the U220. So no wonder it wasn't getting any MIDI information, but it made me update the driver, and that was a good thing. So finally I got some drums, or at least I got the computer to trigger the module so I know that I've got sound. I got drums coming out. But then I got to find a way to trigger the MIDI, record the MIDI into the computer. Well, I normally use a M-Audio. Well, this is what I normally use. It's this little M-Audio keyboard, which does USB and MIDI. But anytime I've ever used it on the computer, I use it USB. I take this special USB cable that I got to find upstairs because I've been tossing that thing around. It's an important cable. Anyway, USB just goes in and it automatically just hooks with Digital Performer. So the USB triggers and sends MIDI data out. And you don't have to plug any MIDI out of the keyboard because it goes USB. But I've never done MIDI with digital audio. So my audio card is taking up one USB port, and the MIDI interface is using the other USB port. So there's no way to plug the keyboard in, right? Yeah, anyway, so I needed another way to be able to hook this up with. I only got 2 USB ports and I don't have a router or a little USB expander. So here was another challenge. I've never used the little keyboard via MIDI, because when you use USB powers the keyboard, so you plug USB in and it comes on. So because I can't use USB, I need to use one MIDI out going into that MIDI interface. I had to find a power adapter, which it just so happens as I've been cleaning the garage, I store these things away, and it's kind of coming to fruition because now the things that I'm storing and putting into place, I can come back and actually can find a use for them. So I use this weird universal wall wart where you can choose the voltage. I had no idea if it would work, and came back around over here and was able to plug it into the back of the keyboard, and you can see it has a multi-pin jack with all of these different kinds of connectors, and I was able to find the right connector to plug it in. When I first turned it on, it didn't work, but it turns out that you have a polarity switch on your wall wart that changes the polarity of the jack. So I flipped that, it flipped the polarity, and sure enough this thing powered on. And I just took MIDI out, which goes right into the MIDI of this audio interface. So MIDI out of the keyboard, it feeds it into the computer, and that routes and channelizes the signal through Digital Performer, which is here. Right, it's kind of hard to see, but you can there are all my tracks laid out in the MIDI channels, and then that comes back out and that goes into my module. So this module U220 is multi-timbral, and it will receive on whatever MIDI channels you pick. The drums are on MIDI channel 10, but you can trigger different sounds on different MIDI channels. So MIDI, I think, is something that's really gotten overlooked in the last 10 years, and it really is a useful tool. So anyway, needless to say, I'm going to sit down here with the camera because I want to kind of get a document of what this sounds like. And I'm just going to kind of cold turkey play along with this groove that I put down with Fender bass playing coming off of the computer, and then the drums are being triggered via the U220 that I programmed live from this little keyboard here. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to play some crap on the Rhodes to see if I get anything that sounds worth anything. I got 11 minutes on the camera here. So I'll just kind of put this camera over here, and hopefully it'll pick up an okay representation of my first, since I've been home from the cruise ship for 4 months, this is the first time I've done anything like this where I actually am doing a MIDI band thing. So we'll see what happens as I'm mixing on the fly, right?